So yeah, without further ado, let's crack on. So hello everyone, thanks for joining us. I hope you joined us earlier for the first seminars of the day with Dr. Kylie Henderson from the Better Health Generation, Kevin Moore and Bob Kitchen from Big Dog and Little Dog, and Helen Lee and Emma Williams from Too Simple to Learn. There'll be an opportunity later today at 2:30 to come back and have a chat about what you've learned and your key takeaways from these sessions during the day. If you didn't get a chance to see those sessions, then please visit the IEP YouTube channel later on tomorrow or Monday, and all of the sessions from the Digital Technology Conference will be up there, including the one we're just going to go into in a moment. In the meantime, our afternoon session now, we are delighted to present Andy Derman from EMSI. Andy has a wealth of experience as a market intelligence professional and a particular expertise in labour market and demographic analysis within the higher and further education sessions. He is also a fellow of the IEP, which we're very pleased to have him in that club, as it were. At 1:30 p.m, just as a reminder, responding to Annie will be IEP fellow Dan Howard from Skills Forward, who will be talking about how you can better understand your customer and encourage the use of technology to plan effective pathways for customers. The corresponding responder session will be People, Process and Technology with technology specialists from Emma Cook, Steve Thorpe, both from CogniSoft, who are our conference sponsors. At the end of the day, don't miss out on this, please. Yesterday's discussion was really good. At the end of the day, at 2:30, the IEP will be holding a 30-minute networking session, which will provide an opportunity to come back and have a chat about what you've learned and your key takeaways for the day. So without further ado now, over to you, Andy. Really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Cheers, Scott. Appreciate it. Now let's see if we can get the tech to work. If you can stop sharing your screen, I should be able to share mine. Okie dokie. Right, here we go. So thank you very much. Hopefully, if I could just get a thumbs up that we can see my screen okay, Helen?
Yep, we can see your screen.
We're off and running. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Helen, for your help in getting this together, and Scott for all of the stuff that we've been doing together here. I am here to talk about the wonderful world of labour market information. My name's Andy and I'm the Managing Director of EMSI in the UK, and welcome to Basingstoke here. You never thought you'd get to Basingstoke today, but you have. Congratulations. So what I'd like to do is just quickly introduce EMSI for if we're new to you. Let me just tell you a little bit about us, and then I'll talk about what I would like to cover in the next 25 minutes or so. So at EMSI, we're passionate, really passionate about helping local economies function more effectively. And economies work effectively when we can connect people to work, to employment, and education obviously plays a massive role in that. And so our goal really is to illuminate what is happening in the labour market through connecting and developing labour market data and insights, such that key actors in supporting communities and economies can function more effectively and ultimately make the right decisions for the situation that they find themselves in. So we do that through a whole range of data sets, and I'll reference some of these data points as we go through around labour market intelligence from government statistics, as well as data that we can learn about what's happening in the weeds of the economy, particularly through hiring activity and understanding the nature of the workforce that sits within different regions, and ultimately thinking not just in aggregate terms, but really about digging into the specifics around what skills are driving employer demand and what skills sit within individuals in the workforce to make those connections. That's how the world of work works. As an organization, we bring our data through those various mediums to a number of different clients, ranging from education and skills world, so work in further and higher education in the career space, through work we do in the economic development realm, particularly working with LEPs and local authorities as they plan and develop their economy and local economies, and ultimately in the world of work and helping employers understand where the talent is that they need to access and the dynamics at play in terms of that, and particularly thinking about how we can encourage employers to think differently about how they hire and understand that the skills that they're looking for might be in places that they haven't traditionally looked as well. We want to really illuminate all facets of the labour market through the data that we provide. So the goal today is really to talk a little bit about what LMI is, how it fits into the employability agenda, and ultimately share a few insights as to what we're seeing in this crazy old world that we're living in right now, that should then hopefully inspire a couple of takeaways for the session later on to kind of discuss and explore further. So that's the goal today. Before I get going, actually, I just want to say a massive thank you for the work that you do. It's times like these, as we certainly stare at our data, and I'll share some of that as we go forward. You know, it's a reminder that having professionals who truly care about connecting individuals onto sustainable career paths and manage through quite tough times is really just so critical to ensuring that local economic ecosystems function more effectively. So I'm always a big fan of the IEP and what Scott's leading on, and ultimately the work that you guys do. So a big thank you from me on that one. So we do have a quick poll, add a bit of interactivity, and hopefully Helen, you can help me on this one. So I wanted to kind of just get a sense in terms of the audience we have today as to kind of where you're at when it comes to the labour market information. So was really interested to kind of see if we can get you just from your experience in terms of, you know, what does LMI to mean to you? First up, in terms of kind of, do you actually use much of that labour market information, and how it goes? So we'll give that another few moments for you to fill in. I can see the screen I have, the bars are moving around. It's all very exciting. And as a data geek, I'm in my element right now, which is fun. So let's go for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right. So what are we looking at? So what we're seeing is so good to see some people are consuming data on a regular basis. I am absolutely thrilled that the "what is LMI?" question mark has not achieved anything. That's good to hear. And so hopefully we've got a good base to build from here. The from time to time piece is a really interesting one. And so, yeah, that's the interesting reference point. Thank you very much for sharing that there. So I have another one just to really get the interaction going at the beginning. So given that most, if not all of you, are using some form of labour market intelligence, I would love to know where that comes from. So what sorts of information do you use? So again, Helen, if we can look at that one. So interested to understand, do you have tools that you use that are dedicated to this? Do you use the national infrastructure we have around ONS? But you know, there are many ways in which you can glean insights about what's happening in the labour market. Oh, and a really interesting mix emerging by the looks of it. So we'll let that settle down, give it a couple more seconds to run through. The wonderful world of the internet seems to be leading. Right, shall we call that one a day? Right, so the internet, interesting. So people have kind of dug around in ONS, and I'm no doubt have had great fun in doing so. Obviously, there are some great resources in local areas like LEPS, etc. There. And I think what that reinforces to me, and particularly the spread, is that there are, of course, many ways in which people can access information about the world of work. So yeah, interesting to see that. That should contextualize our conversation as we go through. So thank you very much. Right, so on to the case in point then. So what is LMI? Thankfully, you largely know what it's about, but ultimately LMI stands for Labour Market Information, and this is data and intelligence that's helping us to describe what the world of work looks like. And there are lots of different dimensions that we can consider when we're thinking about how to describe the world of work, such as kind of what industry does the work happen in. Now, the industry helps us understand the types of employers that are driving an economy, and so gives us one dimension. But actually, probably even more critically, starting to understand what sorts of occupations or jobs that actually are driving that. And industries and jobs are an interesting combination, whereby the same occupation can be found in different industries, and a given industry can employ quite a range of different job roles. Just think of your local hospital. That fits within the health industry, but of course, yes, there are health occupations, but there are also a whole range of other types of job roles that sit within that, from administration through to catering, and gardening, for example. So it's always important to differentiate between those two. The industry is the connection to the employer. The occupation is the type of work that happens. And when we talk about type of work, of course, there are ways in which we can categorize work. Is it full-time or part-time? Is it permanent or temporary, in that sense? So geography, I think, is a really critical part and point, because the reality is every locality has a very different mix of work and activity. And so it's really important, and we'll talk about this in a moment, about understanding the geographic dimension to the world of work, because we live in a big country. We've learnt that commuting is becoming challenging right now, and so actually place is becoming even more important. We also can learn a lot from LMI about actually what work looks like in terms of the actual job itself. So when we talk about a particular role, what does that actually mean in terms of what's needed, what skills are required? And we can also learn a lot from the typical demographics of the workforce. You see great variations when you look into data around gender differentiation by different roles, age profiles. Certain occupations tend to engage a younger demographic who are perhaps moving through early stage career. Other elements of the labour market tend to be more aligned to older workforce, etc. So you do see some variation, and all of this basically is helping us to understand the context of work, to think about how we can then interact with that. So where does this data come from? It's interesting to see the mix of sources that you guys are already pulling from. And I wanted to share with you, I think, some of those key sources that I recommend checking into. So obviously a great starting point are official statistics. So these are government statistics that are derived from various official returns, official surveys, household surveys, labour force surveys, various things like that, that become the official word. And here in the UK, we're somewhat blessed with a really strong infrastructure, data infrastructure, and there's a good, robust data pool to pull from. So we're lucky in that sense, and that's very, very insightful. But that data will always have its challenges, and but also its strengths. And so often it's worth kind of supplementing that kind of intelligence. You can look to bespoke research reports. You hear a lot about YouGov polls and other surveys that are going on, as well as commissioned reports on different parts of the labour market where there's maybe primary research being undertaken. There's also a lot you can learn from what is actually happening just in the transactional economy. So I mentioned earlier job postings. That's a really rich source of insight about what employers are seeking. It gives us a really good clue as to hiring intentions. Doesn't necessarily tell us everything about all jobs in the workforce, but certainly does give us a sense of what's in demand right now. And of course, we hear a lot, and particularly right now, a lot in the media. Lots of companies announcing growth, announcing redundancies, etc. So that does give us a clue, both nationally and locally and regionally. So a wealth of sources, and clearly you guys are all picking up on those various sources. But there's something I want to kind of just throw in here as a labour market professional, some may say geek, and is really thinking about the considerations you need to put around the data. Data is great, but you need to understand the data itself to be able to draw the right conclusions and understand its strengths and also some of its challenges potentially. So just a few things to think about as you access data in terms of the nature of where that data's come from, who's putting that data out there, and for what purpose. What's the quality like? Is it a very small sample that we're getting wild percentages out of, or is actually, like the ONS data, a very large, highly representative statistical survey? How complete is it? Is it just talking about a particular specific theme, or is it looking right across the labour market? A really important thing, and right now, is the timeliness piece. So actually, how up to date is that data? When does it refer to? You know, the challenge with a lot of the official statistics is they're very backwards looking, and at a time where the labour market is moving quickly, we need to be mindful of that. And I'll touch on a few points as we go through some examples. How comparable is it? You know, my view is that the real value is really trying to maximize comparability, so you can not just look within a particular field, but understand its context within, you know, maybe neighboring geographies or other sectors that are employing in the local area to provide that context. And it is important, certainly as you move into the media content and maybe some of those research reports, to ask yourself, what is the purpose and motivation of that data? Is it promoting a particular ideology or a particular focal point? And it's worth just keeping that in mind as you interpret the results and hear the outcomes of that insight. Consistency and detail, I think it connects with comparability as well. Also really important. Are we just getting sort of broad headlines that give us a sense but don't really tell us what the specifics are? Are we getting national picture, but how relevant is that to me in Basingstoke versus wherever you may be, where the economy is slightly different? So various things I think are just important to consider. And on our side, as a labour market data company, we obviously spend a lot of time thinking about these, and we aim very much to kind of focus on data that is of high quality from reliable sources, that is nice and complete, wherever possible is timely, and certainly has a degree of independence. So it's raw data as opposed to necessarily interpretation of that data. And for us, we want to look consistently across the UK, but create the ability to dig down locally. And so the sources we tend to focus hardest on are those from more consistent official statistics, as well as the high volume transactional activities where the sample is large. So that's just kind of just for context, really. So that detail point, I think, is a really important one. Here's a nice little example. So one way to derive detail is to really think about place and locality. And of course, a lot of labour markets are quite localized in nature. And so thought it'd be interesting to share an example of just how you see variation within the labour market. So just looking backwards, 2009 through 2016, looking at call centre occupations, we saw in that time period, nationally in England, a growth of employment of 19%, pretty decent growth there. Now, interestingly, as you start to break that down regionally, say the East Midlands, actually the East Midlands saw a decline in the number of jobs. So just simply assuming that the national average applies to the whole of the East Midlands is clear, would have been wrong. And obviously there's a different nature to the labour market there. But even at the East Midlands level, so the old government office region, we dig deeper and go down further, we can see Derby showed massive growth. So really looking at things as a headline is maybe helpful to understand where the great challenge is, but to actually do anything about it and make sure your focus is right really needs to dig down into specific localities. The other thing I think I wanted to point out on this is around skills. So we often hear a lot about skills gaps and skills challenges, etc. And reality is the labour market more and more so is all about skills these days. But the challenge is one of trying to understand and interpret the skills discussion and really start to connect the dots at a more granular level. So here's an example. I'm in an interview and they're looking for someone to join the call center team, and they're questioning, hey, have you got the skills? Are you right for us? Have you done this job before is often the start point. But actually what they're meaning is something along these lines. Can you do X? Can you do Y? Do you have the right skills? Have you got the right temperament and attitude? That's what's being assessed in an interview, for example. And so the real challenge is trying to maybe start to kind of really think about illuminating the labour market at levels such as these. So that there is hopefully is not new or news to you guys, but just wanted to make sure we were somewhat all on the same page. Now, very quickly, I want to think about where do we bring this into your world? And obviously you are already starting to do this. So hopefully I'm just reinforcing some obvious points here. But ultimately, employability interventions need to, of course, be in tune with the labour market. That's the point, right? We want to connect people back in, whether short-term, medium, long-term. But the reality is the labour market is tricky, it's complex, it's ever changing, it varies by locality. And with finite resources, we need to make sure that we're maximizing impact. So my sense is that, you know, the data here isn't necessarily going to give you all the answers, but what it will do is at least make sure we're focusing in on the right things that will really give us the outcomes that we're seeking, and ultimately help individuals find their way back into the labour market. And, you know, therefore, a big role for data to play in the strategy around employability activities. So in shaping programs and making sure that we're targeting and shaping programs to meet specific local needs, and ultimately to work out where we spend the money and the time there. But critically, you know, it's one thing pointing ourselves in the right direction. It's another thing then delivering against that. So very much on the delivery side, and of course, a big focus for you guys is really about how we might start to translate that into supporting the individuals we're dealing with, both individuals in terms of job seekers and how we can guide them based on their specific requirements and the needs of their area, but also how we can engage employers to connect into their needs and make that connection between individuals seeking employment and employers seeking workers. Some interesting examples that we're playing with on our side. This is more theoretical than a specific data point, but certainly, you know, the importance of them being able to connect this at a local level. So there's data, and we'll look at some of this in an aggregate place, understanding the growing unemployment profile. But of course, we can also look to data to understand what employer demand looks like and who's hiring. And the occupation is a great place to make that connection. So you can sort of map occupations against that. And of course, our attention is focused towards that top end, those areas where we're seeing greater volumes and growth in displaced workers, and think about, well, what job roles and therefore the skills that they're bringing with them do they can hold? We need to focus in on the individuals there. But the challenge is then aligning that to where the re-emerging economy is developing. So, you know, if we're in that top right-hand corner, that's really a case of a sort of a brokerage style, quick interventions. Let's connect workers, potential workers to employers seeking workers. But there's an interesting challenge here in the top left, which is where there's maybe a decent amount of unemployment, or not decent, an unfortunate amount of unemployment, but there really isn't much return of demand in the labour market. And so that really is more about a medium-term intervention and perhaps thinking about how we can upskill and reskill. And of course, we want to be pointing people to where the employer demand lies there. So so that's the kind of the critical focus, and thinking about how does that shape our strategic prioritization in meeting the needs of our local area. But then ultimately on the delivery side, of course, it's about then starting to individualize this and understand, well, if you're if you're an individual, what is your background and skills profile based on the work you did before and perhaps your work history? And then how do we find that route to those next nearest opportunities based on employers that are not necessarily looking for the specific job that you did before, but actually could benefit from the skills you have achieved and attained in your work and education life. And obviously the key is to find that path of least resistance and the closest fit. But of course there will be a skills gap. But if we can understand the skill shape of a job seeker, and we can understand the skill shape of what the employer is seeking, we can then very quickly understand what the gap is to fill and go and seek interventions accordingly. So with an eye on the clock and thinking about having a bit of a time for questions at the end, I did want to share just a few snippets that we're picking up from recent labour market data, just to kind of set the scene and maybe inspire some of that conversation and thinking. And so wanted to kind of obviously share some of the latest stats. Actually, the August figures were released on claimant count yesterday, day before. I haven't had a chance to actually put those into this slide, but actually it has picked up to around about the 2.7 million mark now. So we've obviously seen a serious rise from March as lockdown started to impact there. So that's the headline. But on the left-hand side, we can see that this is something that really is a universal challenge right across the country, but actually in percentage rise terms, we can see where that impact has been greatest. So those red swathes, southern central England, southwest in particular, has seen the greatest percentage rise there, and then areas of Northern Ireland, Scotland as well, and across the central belt of Wales. So we can already start to see that the scale is variable around the country, and a lot of that will be influenced by the nature of the industry that is represented and the employment profile within these regions. We know, for example, the Southwest is very reliant on the tourism and accommodation food services industry. That one has been hit particularly hard, has secured significantly higher percentages of furlough, for example, which gives us a clue as to where future unemployment challenge may lie. On the flip side, we did see a pretty sharp fall in hiring activity through understanding job posting activity, but the promising sign is one of clearly not up to the scale that we were before, but it is picking up and continuing to rise month on month, which is promising there. And again, you know, we can see regionally, most areas are now starting to see that growth, although there are a few stubborn areas clinging on and then continuing to fall a little in recent times. So again, you know, two sides of that coin that we were talking about, but very difficult to make the connection when we're just thinking about aggregate numbers. The question is, what are we seeing in the detail, and particularly at an occupational level where we can start to make those connections between labor supply and labor demand? And so on the left-hand side, we have to, one of the great challenges with a lot of the official statistics on unemployment is a severe lack of visibility on actually what the job roles are that people have come from. I think that's one of the great things that you guys need to be doing a lot, is really gathering that intelligence, of course. We can look to the job seekers allowance data to give us some clues. It's a subset of the claimant count, so it's roughly, I think, about 12%, with universal credit taking over. It's kind of spoilt the data party a little, unfortunately. And what we're seeing in there on the left-hand side is particularly around construction and retail, where the early unemployment has emerged there. But in terms of then what's re-emerging on the right-hand side there around kind of employer demand, we're actually seeing quite a mix there. Certainly the whole logistics, e-commerce growth is really driving a lot of attention. So drivers, couriers, and then the storage occupation. So that's a component. Construction is re-emerging again now, but actually, whilst on the left-hand side, we're seeing a lot of low-skilled roles that have been hit, mid to low. On the right-hand side, in terms of what's re-emerging, there's some low-skill, but actually we're finding actually probably mid to high skill as well, if you think about the healthcare settings and the IT telecom settings as well. So we are seeing a bit of a shift that needs to be managed through. I mentioned furlough earlier in terms of where the challenge is, and just to build that out. So furlough has obviously been popular in take-up and has helped, hopefully, to minimize the short-term impact, but we are starting to stare at the end of that scheme and a lot of questions about where we go from here. The right-hand side is a little model that we developed by using some of the early furlough data and other data sets to kind of work out which sectors are most exposed to disruption currently. And unsurprisingly, we're seeing the food and accommodation, arts and recreation sector and retail being hit hardest, I think, and having the greatest exposure. And of course, as I talked about earlier, that does influence, therefore, where we're seeing that impact and greatest impact, and potentially we'll see even more impact as furlough gets wound back. Left-hand side is a map of where the workforce concentrations are in that top category, the accommodation and food service. And you can see those parts, particularly coastal regions, where their share of the workforce is greater than the national average. So this is where they're exceptionally reliant on these industries for work. We already saw how that was starting to translate into hotspots of unemployment. And again, these are areas we need to think about. So that presents the challenge. And if that demand isn't going to return, then of course we need to be thinking about the sorts of skills and work that is typically held in those roles, and where we might redeploy that within the local economy as to what is growing and in demand. And then really just to close out the discussion, or maybe inspire the discussion, of course, I've focused here a little bit on the short term of what's happening around the COVID impact. there are other things that are certainly disrupting the labour market that we need to be mindful of. This whole Brexit thing seems to be re-emerging again. And that, of course, is pre-COVID was the big preoccupation there. And that's going to have some quite profound impacts on our economy. And again, understanding where that exposure is, there's big chunks of our economy that are reliant on trade with the rest of the EU. But on the flip side, an opportunity also to open up trade with the rest of the world on our own terms. Similarly, on the labour and access to talent, a big concern is the challenge of not necessarily getting access to the full European talent market. The flip side, of course, is that maybe refocuses our attention to homegrown talent and exploiting and extracting the true value of our own people in opportunities there. And then, of course, we have the automation, the fourth industrial revolution that's also at play and is very much alive and kicking in the labour market. And we're seeing that right now. Hey, we're on a virtual conference. We're all now Zoom professionals, and we can see that we're adapting to more of these situations. So it's just shining a very bright light, COVID, right now on that importance of tech skills, but also, if we think about the fact that it's that low skilled end of the labour market that's been disrupted through COVID, it's the same group and challenge that I think the automation agenda is likely to impact as well. So now potentially is a fantastic time for us to think about how we invest, not just in helping people back into the labour market short term, but how we use this opportunity to invest in building our tech skills base to make sure that today's unemployed workforce remain in the workforce for longer and don't find their way back out again at the next challenge. So that's aside from my couple of takeaways just to close on, last poll for us to run on. So I suppose it was good to see the volume of work you guys doing and the type of labour market intelligence. I suppose my question to you is, how do you feel about this? Do you feel like it's kind of, it's an obvious thing to say, look, we need more, we need to be using more of this in our day job? Or is it a case that actually, we're nicely tuned in? It's always good to get a sense check on this. I'd be really disappointed, given that no one said, what is LMI at the beginning, that if we see someone say, what is LMI? Scott, don't select that one just for a joke. Yeah. So I think we can put that one to bed then, Helen. And hey, good. I might be doing my job okay here. So of course, the world is very complex and we need to dig into it. So yes.
Andy, seems as I'm a co-host, I can't actually vote on them, I'm afraid. It's a real shame. It bothers me every time.
Yeah.
It's always done on purpose, Andy. So I make sure we have these things under control. I'm going to share with you some of the questions in a moment, if that's okay. And I wonder if I came up with a question. So please, guys, if you've got some questions, we've had some comments which I'll share. If you've got some questions, please get them in for us at the end of the session.
Absolutely. We have 7-8 minutes, haven't we? So just, I suppose, to conclude on my point before we dig into some of those questions, and I think this is resonating with the feedback on the poll, is my sense is that labor market, realistically, labor market data and data in general has often been seen as a nice thing to have, the right thing to do, but we have plenty of other problems to be solving, and I need to just get busy solving those on the ground. And I think, one of the things I've been trying to champion, and I'm grateful for Scott's support and the connection, is really that actually, more and more so, bringing more data up front. It might feel like there's a bit more work up front, but I think it will help focus attention more effectively. And so my key takeaway is, look, I just want to keep helping and educating around what data is, and really think about how we can get more of that data into your hands so that you can use it more effectively. And critically, this is all about helping employability professionals play to their strengths on the professional end of dealing with individuals. So can we lift a load on the data side so you can focus your skill set where you can have the greatest impact? Let's embrace the data and technology in that sense. And I do think more and more so, and I'm sure you're picking this up in your own conversations, it really is about skills in the labor market now. So how do we really help individuals understand the skill sets they have break through some of those challenges and barriers of working through unemployment or struggling to find work, and actually really start to think about a common language that we can then connect to employers who are seeking similar skills. The economy will work a lot more efficiently if we can really start to build out an understanding at that level. And also, this is something I think we need to build into all of us as individuals, as professionals, and anyone in the workforce. We need to be thinking about our own skills and how we continue to adapt and develop those as the world around us changes. And that's no different to people who are starting out in careers, coming towards the twilight of the career, or moving through. The world is changing rapidly, and we need to be mindful of our skills and continuing to develop and hone our skills.
Hey Andy, can I just come in and reinforce that? I think this pandemic and the recession and the economic challenges that it has provided for us all, I think is quite unique. And I think that does go hand in hand with the requirement for good labour market intelligence. I think no longer are we going to be able to rely, as we could do in 2008, 2009 and recessions previous to that, with those areas of the economy where people can go back to work quickly, which would traditionally be retail, would traditionally be hospitality. Those, there would be a plethora of vacancies normally in those areas. Now, they're areas, particularly retail, that was struggling anyway prior to this, prior to the pandemic, and that was without a minor Brexit bump or a cyclical recession. So it was a challenge there. And then secondly, obviously hospitality is in relative lockdown still as a sector. So there are very, very few opportunities there. And that means that if we look at the data, that women and young people are most significantly affected because they're occupations that people can move into. Hugely generalizing, I know, but in essence, the data states that. So what are we going to do? How are we going to know that we future-proof people's skills to give them the best opportunity when the roles are available? How do we know what those roles are going to be in 6 months, 12 months? Well, the only way you know that is to use labour market intelligence to work out where the growth sectors are, and then you can actually provide the skills and the opportunities and the development to your customers who may not be able to go into work overnight because there is not the opportunity available. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of throw my 10 penneth in there.
Really great point. Yeah. I am now largely done. I just wanted to say, hey, check out our website, particularly our blog, but we've got some other pages. We're passionate about the data, but also helping people understand what the data is telling us. So there's a load of resources on there. We've done a lot around recent trends, post-COVID impact, etc. So if you want to find out more, I'd encourage you to head to our website and head to the blog. There's lots of good data points, etc. And obviously, feel free to reach out. But Helen, throw some.
Okay, so we've had lots of comments, and I'll pick some out. So I do apologise to anyone if you've popped a comment in there and I don't share it. And we have a couple of questions as well. Susan said it would be interesting to see how the food sector is affected in regards to redundancies and unemployment over the next 12 months. The recent massive recruitment drives to meet increased demand will ultimately lead to redundancies to come in the future as demand drops. So post-COVID, going into next year, surely this sector will lose more roles as others increase.
Interesting. By food, do we mean food production or supermarkets, I wonder?
It doesn't say. I wondered that myself, because it could be hospitality or supermarkets. It feels more like maybe even manufacturing. I'm sure Suzanne will share that with us in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose hospitality, as per Scott. I mean, the reality is we'll work our way through this, and we all like to go out. The Help Out to Eat Out scheme gave a real nice boost. You can see that in the data on the kind of hospitality side. I think it's just finding that I'm not going to use the phrase. I'm not going to use it. The new whatever.
Yes.
On the food production, I think actually what maybe we're seeing in the signs of Brexit and other things is a need to service more of that actually through our own homegrown talent, perhaps where talent pipelines are uncertain. So I think there's maybe good potential there, although as you look at it from the automation agenda, that might be a ripe area, excuse the pun, for focusing hard in capital and technology investment. So how do we adapt those skills to either accommodate and support the technology or find routes elsewhere? On the supermarket side, of course, they've gone nuts in terms of hiring throughout and attracted an interesting workforce. A lot of high-skilled people have that cool. Naturally, I think that hopefully those high-skilled people will find their way back into high-skilled labor market and be productive for their families and the economy. But I think a lot of that shift to online, to distribution, is just moving the work into slightly different places. The amount of pickers you see now as you wander around a supermarket is incredible. So yeah, I think there's definitely change. And again, to Scott's point, the challenge is just keeping an eye on it so we can adapt as it changes.
Oh, interesting. So Leslie says she's already seeing providers asking for more LMI recruitment, which she never has before, which is an interesting point. We do have a question from Nikki. Can we get our local LMI?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, certainly that's something we major in, is kind of illuminating the local LMI. There are bits in those sources that we mentioned in terms of official sources. EMSI has a commercial proposition which is all about trying to open up access to LMI either directly or through partnerships. So yeah, interested to hear more about that, and certainly have a few things. And in those resources, we do put out various snippets of local reports. So there's certainly local reports you can go and find, but happy to take that offline.
Okay. And I've got a question for you for us to finish with. We've had some other comments, but just from a practitioner point of view, how much time do you think practitioners at the moment should be devoting to really understanding these changes in LMI? And do you have any time-saving tips that help them to get to the level earlier that you showed with Derby really showed the differences there can be? How can someone do that quickly in order to understand their market?
Really, yeah, thanks for that.
Sorry.
So I think certainly I'd say devote more time, but you can't obviously spend 99% of your time pouring through numbers, because that's taking away from the great work that needs to be done in adapting to those. So I think there's an interesting model of thinking about the nature of how employability activity works in terms of the different organizations and the tiers of organization. I think if you get the strategy, use the data at the strategy front end, that will help focus attention to where it's greatest. That then minimizes the scrabbling around trying to think about different angles, that says you can then focus in on fewer things but go deeper perhaps. I think there is a lot of work, not just what we're doing and partners of ours, but others out there are trying to. The big challenge with labour market data, to be brutally candid, is moving it closer to just being sort of on demand, the thing that you need for that specific situation. So there's a lot of investment going into building a career tech kind of sector. Nesta are doing a lot of work that we're involved with there, where we're trying to bring more of that to the front and actually try and bring more of that to the job seekers themselves directly, so they can at least get the process going. So I think you've got to be sensible with the balance of time, but I think more can be done up front. It should make it a lot easier. The ultimate challenge is moving towards more of an individualized learning profile. And that's probably where data like ours needs to connect with other providers. Obviously CogniSoft are sponsoring this event and are in that realm, and we're, there's always conversations to have there about how do we make it easier for advisors on the front line to just get the data they need at the point they need it, rather than have to do what we do, which is mine everything to get to the pertinent stuff. So yeah, it's a good question that we're working on for sure.
Excellent, thank you. So that's everything we have right now. So I think Scott might join us. Thank you for that.
Hi everybody. Well, thank you very much for that, Andy. Absolutely insightful as ever. Fantastic addition to our digital technology conference today. We are steadily moving towards the end of our process today, day 2 in our digital technology conference, but don't be perturbed. Coming up, we've got our 2 responder sessions from Skills Forward and from CogniSoft. Make sure that you have already pre-booked or followed the links that are available to get onto one of those sessions, see what those individuals and those organizations have to say about what Andy's just told us. And then following that, at 2:30, we have the opportunity to all come together, have a chat. You can tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, tell us what you're going to take away, tell us what you've learned, all of those things, so we can make sure that as we're planning these activities, we can continue to do it as right as we possibly can for you. And if we don't see you again during the afternoon, please make sure you head over to the IEP YouTube channel, subscribe, get all the videos from everything else we've ever done. And even if you don't do that, make sure you engage with the Live Learn Lunch series. We have webinars of a similar nature to Andy's every single week, at least one a week, for basically ever. And they're a really good resource, and they're really good learning, and a really good opportunity to engage and connect with your colleagues. So if there's nothing else from the chat, thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you to everyone who's saying a great session. Everyone's saying great session, Andy, for you. So thank you very much. We'll leave you with it. We'll see you on the other side in about 10 minutes for the responder sessions. Thank you.